Yeah.
5 old men.
Yeah.
Diversity.
That was a perspective that's communicated.
Want to thank our guests, and I'll start off by saying, look at the operating budget, and I know that there are some questions about understanding totally the recession plan and the additional FFT for the budget this year and what that's going to mean in the future. So, are there any questions from members on any of the expense side of the budget? So it's straightforward for me.
I was curious why the advertising went down so much. It's positive, but still, I was just curious.
You didn't have an advertisement.
Oh, maybe that's been after the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so perhaps you can explain, well, I think we've heard a little bit, but you could
Well,
go.
basically, my plan is to retire this current year. Right now, we have a full-time person, which is me, and then Jamie is a part-time, and then we have an administrator assistant as part-time. This budget has budgeted in for full-time and 2 part-times, one with them interviewing full-time too, so that it was but 2 part-times and a full-time is the inspection portion, not just running the office. And we were told that you wanted to know how we're going to work out about proportion that's paid. So in the past, when I did the analysis, we based it on 70% of the time that we spend doing stuff in the office has to do with building. So basically, a manager's role, he does assessing, and she spent like half the time of assessing and half the time of building. And then we also do zoning compliance. So the zoning compliance in the past, it's been part-time person did all building, and the zoning administrator did, let's say 25% of the time was zoning, and 30% of the time, 75% of the time with building. So that would work out to 2 full-times and part-time, work out to 100 hours a week. So that breaks it down at 70 hours a week is devoted just to building. And when we did the building permit stuff, we took the total cost of building. We added in $15,000 for overhead for administration costs. And then we multiplied that from 70%. So what happened this past year, we actually made more revenue than what it cost. There's been years in the past where we didn't quite make as much. I think part of the reason is the cost of building's gone up way faster than the cost of running the building department. So that we do our rates based on for $1,000 a cost. So with the building cost being so much higher, the revenue coming in is higher. And even with having this part-time person, when you base it on that percentage that's worked on the building, we wouldn't have to raise our building permit fees to cover the other part-time person this coming year based on the same building volume that we've had this past couple of years. If you decided to change it to another full-time, so there'd be, a full-time administrator, and then 2 full-time building people, and then a part-time building thing, which is something that's been kind of discussed in the past. We figured the rates would have to go up to $11.50 a thousand. Right now we charge $8.50 a thousand. But at current rates, we get you're allowed to recoup the cost of the service provided. It's how the state statute works. So that recoups our cost for the service provided for the building.
So did Jamie worked with John to put together a memo? I sent it out last night. Did everybody see that? I don't expect maybe you've read it all. John basically summarized what it said, but the fact of the matter is it's not. John described the methodology that has been used for identifying how much of the work and effort and the budget in that department is focused on building activities. The 15,000 for administrative overhead costs, finance administration, human resources administration, et cetera. That number might be out of date too. So
I used to use 10. We went up to 15 this year.
right. So point being, the department is currently well funded through user fees. If the committee wanted to look at trying to increase revenue in the building department to cover the 26-ish thousand dollars of the additional half of an FTE. That would be like bringing the per thousand cost from $850 to like $950. To cover a full-time employee, it would be like bringing the fees from $850 to $1150. And so if the committee, not just looking, John makes a good point that revenue is good this year. We've been under before, we've been over before. If the budget committee wants to, as an offsetting justification, aims increase revenue to cover the additional costs, not, holding constant what was collected in revenue this year, then recommending approval of the budget with a recommendation to increase the building permit fees $1, $1,000 from $850 to $950 would cover that cost based on current utilization. Obviously, if building plummets next year, that's something different, or if building costs go through the roof next year, that's something different also, but we don't have control over all of that.
I mean, that would be my suggestion is this should be a revenue producing department that covers their costs, similar to trash, similar to rec. It's not my responsibility to cover costs for someone who wants to move to town and build a house.
It does cover the cost. Though.
No.
That's the point I made. We already cover our costs.
Yeah, no, I think John gets that.
Right, what I'm just saying is like, I would recommend increasing the building permit fees to cover the additional expense and not out of the general fund.
It doesn't come, that's the point I'm trying to make. If you base it on on the analysis that we just did, we made more money this year than we were supposed to make. And if at the current rate, because of what's going on, we're gonna make enough to cover this year's proposed budget without raising our rates. And the RSA is very clear. What it says is you have a right to recoup your cost for your services provided, but you're not supposed to make a profit. And if we're recouping our services, if we raise our rate, we're going to make a profit to cover some other cost that's over and above the building, which is what you're not supposed to do.
And perhaps I was confused too, because I thought the part-time per position was going to be an additional cost.
No, it's in the budget. If you look at the total cost, it's in the budget.
So the cost analysis done now at $8 a thousand covers
Your proposed budget, which has
Proposed
that part-time person in
But
it.
I agree that should we go up to additional fees, then we should increase that. So we add more people.
But even adding the more people, it's covered. That's what I was trying to say. Is the building cost has gone up so much faster than the cost of running the department that that cost is already covered. I mean, there's in all rights, I'll back up. No one's out there policing it. If you start making a profit on the building department, there's no one that's gonna come in and say, you're a bad boy and slap your hand. But if we're gonna try to do what is correct and right, then that's a different issue.
Yeah, you have the revenue and expense, it's covered, but in theory, you're adding more expense that come out of already existing revenue, so it does, even if it's minute, there still isn't really a tax implication by adding an expense without corresponding revenue.
If you actually break it down, if we didn't add an expense, we should be cutting our building permit fees to stay in line with what the state statute says.
But I don't think we can make those determinations based on 1 year data, right? That's not what we've done
I've done it for
before.
like 5-6 years.
But we haven't been consistently collecting more fees than is justifiable for 5 or 6 years. We've been in line for 5 or 6 years, and in the current year, we're projected to collect more than the basis of that
This
analysis.
past year, we collected way more.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's way more though, because so if we look at,
We take 70% of our cost is what is supposed to come out of the.
so this is going from left to right. This is 2020 to 2022 actual and 2023 and 2024 budget. And so building permit fees are here. So 110 to 239, that's when we change this fees altogether, increase the fees and change the structure a little bit. So that was a big year. That was a COVID year. The next year it was, and this is an actual, down to 226. 228.5 is the 2023 budget estimate and 228.5 is the 2024 budget estimate. And so we're not, the numbers aren't dramatic. And to John's point about nobody's out there policing it, we want to be close. It's important to be consistently close, but we know that there's variability in utilization of the building department costs, especially when our rates are set based on user fees. I know from working with this committee over the last 4 or 5 years that where possible, where this committee can look at an increased cost and say, here's the offsetting revenue, or here's a proposal for offsetting revenue, that's a model that has been consistent. And so based on user fees, our user fees right now are in or on the low end of the per 1,000 user fee cost for building permits in the area. There's a lot of 9s, there's a lot of 11s. Going from 850 to 950 keeps us in the middle of the pack, is able to communicate to voters that this is an additional budget from 2023 to 2024, and this is an additional revenue source from 2023 to 2024 that we anticipate offsetting that. If we end up with a multi-year trend where we're bringing in more revenue than we can justify expenses in the department, then we would need to revisit that. But also if and to the Steve Saunders point about the succession management plan for the department, what we'd like to do long-term is consolidate the 2 half FTE positions into a full-time position where we have 2 full-time people that are here every day. And so, another part of, past practice for this committee is working gradually towards those budget impacts and having, if we end up, 2 years in a row where we're collecting more user fees than we have direct costs, that's a perfect on-ramp for us to introduce a consolidating to 2 full-time positions. And we don't have to bring user fees up dramatically to make that difference.
Describe that transition then. When you retire, he then moves into your slot.
Mhm.
And then he gets backfilled as a half? Or
Who?
Jamie.
No, so Jamie, the plan as it exists right now is when John retires as full-time building inspector, Jamie will become full-time building inspector. John has agreed to stay under the town's employment in a part-time deputy building inspector position. And we are proposing to add an additional part-time deputy building inspector position, half of an FTE. So the benefit of that model for the near term, as far as succession management, is we've retained the institutional knowledge of John, who's able to continue mentoring Jamie and train the new person who's likely going to come in with no experience. In a perfect world, when John Huggins is ready to stop working altogether, the person we've hired as a deputy is still working for us and is interested and willing to move into a full-time position. We consolidate those 2. Jamie and the person we would hire next year would be the 2 full-time staff members in the building inspection office. And so if at that point, we might also need more staff. I mean, it will be very much driven by the demand in the department. The demand in the department right now justifies adding half of an FTE, increasing $1 per 1,000, make sure that we have enough based on this year and prior years.
If we go to 2 full-time employees, what does that do to our costs? And will that be covered under the revenue we're getting now?
It would increase the benefit.
We'd have to
That's the big
increase
thing.
our per 1,000 feet to about 1150 to cover the
A
benefit.
full-time.
Well, that was 2 full-times and a half-time, when I figured the 1150.
Okay,
That wasn't with,
Not just 2.
right, not just 2 full-times.
so and we are planning to do that, is that
That's the plan.
then maybe it would make sense at this point to bump it up $1.
Right.
Because that's gonna be some extra fees, and that way it's in the pipeline and it's not coming out of the general fund, it's there. And if somebody comes and says, well, you're not supposed to do this, I think that at that point, we can reasonably explain that we anticipate in the additional costs of having 2 full-time inspectors, and that's why we raised the fee to $9.
Right.
And it still keeps us in the middle of the pack.
And we haven't had an actuarial analysis of the true cost of the building department, right? Factored into that is not the capital cost of the code enforcement vehicle. Factored into that, the $15,000 a year for, all of the cash receipting and the finance and human resources support for the staff members of the department. So, I mean, I think if somebody came in and said, you're charging us too much, I think that would also be a trigger for us to go and say, okay, let's let's put everything on the table, right? In that administrative cost, guess what? That building department occupies eighth of this building, right? What are our annual operating costs for this building? And I don't think anybody's going to split hairs if we're in the middle of the pack on our user fees, but I understand. I think you make a good point about the gradual increase.
And the other point to go along with that, when you look to hire someone, you can put it out for part-time and see what's available, because sometimes persons won't start part-time and sometimes a person will want a full-time job. So you gotta see what's available for what you need to fill your role, you know, and in a perfect world, you can do all the right perfect things, but it doesn't always happen.
When did we last raise rates? 3 years ago?
3 years ago, I think it was 3 or 4.
January of 2021, I think, was when we had the new rates go effective, right? So that will be 3 years. And I would say, and I don't know what you think about this, John and Jamie, but if a recommendation comes from this committee to approve the budget with the additional half of an FTE with $1 per thousand rate increase, it seems logical that rate, well, I don't know if what seems logical. I guess there's 2 possibilities, either January 1st or April 1st. January 1st, because that's clean, it's a calendar year, we just do it that way. April 1st, because we wouldn't bring on that additional half of an FTE any sooner than April 1st.
And technically, the selectmen would have to vote to raise the rate.
Right, and that's why it's a recommendation from this group. What would you guys think if do you have input on January 1st or April 1st? We've done it January 1st before.
Either one is justifiable. I don't think there's
Yeah.
much argument from the public that most people won't recognize the increase. How much do I owe you is.
Right. What's the workload difference January 1st versus April 1st? Like, would it be easier to do it in January because there's less building permits being pulled and?
Not really. The last couple of years, right through the winter and stuff, we didn't have a bad winter last year. I don't anticipate a bad winter this year.
Right.
And what's going on and what people are doing, it's, they can break ground and get a foundation in their building.
Right. So we're thinking, doesn't matter. What does the budget committee think?
I say Q1.
January.
Yeah.
January.
Is there a consensus on that? Do you all want to take a vote or?
Yes.
There's consensus.
Peter?
Yes. I have an organizational question, if I may, unrelated to the budget. Just thinking ahead to having 2 full-time people, would they have specific areas? I know you get into a city, there's a plumbing inspector, there's an electrical inspector. Would both inspectors have the same breadth of coverage? Have you thought about that?
In my opinion, I think it would all depend on who you hire and what their area of expertise. If you could compartmentalize and break it up into segments like that, it might be better. But at the same time, having overlap, if someone's out on vacation, having someone that does both, I think is a benefit as well.
But I think if somebody had some particular expertise,
Right.
the other person could always defer to them. Right. Yeah.
And one of the things we talked about having tremendous value of 2 full-time people, or even adding the half FTE, so there's overlap, or we can have 2 people working all 40 hours of the working week, is somebody can be in the field and somebody can be in the office to answer questions. I won't speak for John and Jamie, but the field work's very important, but the good graces that John has built and Jamie is also sustaining in the community with building inspection is because they invest a tremendous amount of time advising people through the building process. And that's a lot of office time here, sitting down at the little circle
I've
table.
experienced a
Right.
lot of that myself.
Yeah.
I
So
agree.
that's part of the idea also, you know, Jamie brings up a good point about the specialty, but having people here, so somebody can be in the field doing inspections, which they have to do, but somebody can be, you know, available all the time. It's always a sad situation to watch a builder walk in because they've got a break in between running from this job to the next job to try to catch John or Jamie. They walk in and see Amanda, oh no, they're out on inspection, sorry. They mope out and hope they can catch them the next time, but I think it'd be good customer service.
And then a big part of it, the job too, is, John does all the plan review currently, so when the plans come in, he's got to evaluate them for code compliance and zoning compliance. So to have someone in the office, like Connor said, that does that portion and the customer service role, it could be a good split that way. There's also talk about Vanessa would love to see John stay on as the zoning administrator and take that out of the building department and keep a separate role, just as the zoning administrator. Other municipalities have a dedicated person for complaints and zoning, so it's not in building anymore. So there's quite a few divisions that could be made, depending on the staff, I guess.
There are no plans to restructure like that right now, but, you know, as things change.
Now, can we talk a little bit about assessing? What is her role in assessing?
Basically, it's administrative functions in support of our assessing consultant. So we pay about $100,000 a year for a contract assessor. And that they do most of the professional assessing work. What Amanda does in support of their role is she's the day-to-day and the primary interface with the public. So whether it's filing an abatement, pursuing exemptions and credits, maintaining current use files, even just pulling property record cards for people, that administrative in-office work available to talk intelligently to residents about assessing topics, because we don't pay the contract assessor to be here
Now,
regularly.
is that, since it's all funded in this budget,
Mhm.
and we've now sent out huge tax increases to everybody, and there'll be a lot of abatement requests probably. Was her workload gonna go up, and will she be able to accommodate that work?
Workload will definitely go up.
Things fluctuate during the
Right.
course of the year for both departments. We all try to work together. Sometimes someone takes on a little bigger role for a short period of time, up and out, back and forth. Jamie will tell you, he comes back from his inspections, between answering phone calls and talking with people and stuff, a lot of times with, taking inspections and stuff that Amanda's doing because she's doing something else. That's something that happens. We all work together. We're a department that work together. That's,
The good thing is the really heavy lifts of processing abatement requests are performed by the contract assessor. So Amanda's role in abatement requests are creating the file, pulling together the pertinent information, making sure it's a complete abatement request.
And smiling while she ges all the complaints from the
Right,
residents.
right. And so, the assessor is the one who does the analysis of, okay, do they make a proper justification on a reduction in value? They were reviewing one the other day, somebody on Hall Road requested an abatement, and it was just way off base, no basis for the reduction in value, and so it went straight in the shredder.
Filing I have a copy of it.
But anyways, yeah, so the contract assessor, and that's and I will continue to advocate very strongly for the model that we have with contract assessing, because we have access to a tremendous amount of resources with the contract assessor. I know we're not talking about this right now, but as the workload increases with a lot of abatement requests, they rise to the occasion to do that. And when it falls away, they don't, and, work on other things. And so we don't have to maintain the staffing to manage those fluctuations.
Any questions?
Thank you, guys. Speaking of said abatements, do you have something in your fictitious money lines to cover those for next year?
Yeah, so how I always talk about overlay during tax rate setting or relative to tax rate setting, and I always call it pixie dust because it's hard to describe. So,
What line is that?
overlay, it's not a line. It's not a budget.
All right.
It's not a budget. It's outside the budget. I know, it's yeah.
Good scrutiny used to tear down the old town hall.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're such a
Pixie dust.
You're such a jerk. Okay, so
-1.
this is actually 2022. It doesn't matter, but so this page, right, lists all of the jurisdictions, although they play some funny business and list school twice in two separate categories, even though it's all local money. It's raised here, it's spent here. But this shows the tax effort for each jurisdiction. And then the following pages list out how you arrive at that tax effort. And so, and this is like the simplest terms. I just put together some frequently asked questions on the town's website about how a tax rate comes. And so, in the simplest way, you describe it as the total money approved by voters divided by the total value, and that times by 1,000, and then that's your tax rate. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and it's even a little bit more complicated than this. But in 2022, this is the total amount voters approved. And this comes from warrant articles and the operating budget, anything else that's appropriated. This is our locally collected revenue, right? Our meals and rooms tax, our highway block grant, transfer station, building department, et cetera. Now, this is how we used to do it, right? You'll see fund balance voted surplus. In 2023, the number's here, it's 747,000 and it's here, but it has the same effect, right? It does the same thing because we're taking that total appropriation, we're taking out some revenue, we're taking out another source of revenue. This is where you add back in the war service credits. So these are the veteran credit, service connected total disability. So those are redistributed. Anybody that has one of those credits still pays for it, which is a smaller portion of it, right? And then this is overlay. So overlay is added back in as an additional appropriation. So this number usually doesn't change a lot year over year.
Who says that?
So, well, I'll get to that in just a second. This number doesn't change a lot year to year, but the primary function of overlay is to cover abatements, because what happens is a tax year closes and then people file abatements for that tax year. So what Department of Revenue Administration says is the money to pay for those abatements should come from that tax year. So you carry this balance. But if you don't use it, or the portion that you don't use is carried forward and doesn't impact future taxes. If we spent down the whole 117,000, we would have to replenish it. To the question about how is it set, it's generally, unless you anticipate a huge volume of abatements, like in 2021, we increased it expecting a lot of abatements, but there really weren't that many. So there wasn't really truly justification for increasing it. And so you want to make sure that it's one, consistent, because if you increase this number, look at this math, it would increase your tax effort, right? So if you went from 117 to 500,000, you basically added $400,000 to the tax rate. So maintaining consistency is probably the biggest guiding force on how it's determined. If you anticipate anything crazy for abatements, like sometimes you're in litigation because a big taxpayer has filed for an abatement and you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars for one single taxpayer. We don't really have properties like that where it's a big deal, although it would be nice if it did. And then the tax rate is always even, right? So it's $16.69 even. So overlay, to get the math to divide this number, actually the total appropriation on the first page. But to get this number divided by that number to equal an even number without any additional decimal places, they balance, DRA does, balances the whole tax rate on this number. And that's why it's a funky number, because they take away enough here to get to an even number. And so it always moves a little bit. But that's overlay, that's how abatement's paid for.
Well, when you assess a whole neighborhood of a square mile, and everybody goes up the same rate, even though it's different from what the rate was in the rest of the town, that's okay, you can't abate it, because everybody in your neighborhood went up.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about assessments for a whole meeting, but at the end of the day, it's fair market value drives that. Whether that's driven by a neighborhood or not is still driven by the fair market. And if you have justification that the assessed value is not consistent with the fair market, then file an abatement and they'll be here for that, you know? Okay.
Okay, so let's move on to the capital improvement program. Any more questions though on this? Taxation.
Let's do Vanessa. Let's do Vanessa's.
Well, I think, so you guys have any questions?
Oh,
for me?
you're gonna do the capital?
Yeah. I'm welcome to entertain questions too.
I was just step up for just 1 second. You don't need it for right now, right? You can talk about her budget.
Do you want me to go over the, I don't know,
Yeah.
I didn't have any questions.
Oh,
Oh,
okay, perfect. Yeah, well, if you have questions.
I don't think the budget's basically all salary based, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we need to
No
talk
issue.
about it.
Right, it's still, the big issue for us is going to be the capital improvement program and the scheduling of those needs, as well as all of the warrant articles that we have to do with this year that have already been submitted. I don't know if there's more that really need, or some sort of warrant article that will relate to the capital improvement program that has to be added to the list tonight. That's a question.
oh, okay. This was recently, I don't know if you guys have your packet, he said he sent it out electronically, but I can make copies if anybody wants or needs copies. But, so it was recently adopted by the planning board the 14th. The major, for your purposes, I think, if you do happen to have, I think it'd be helpful if everybody had one. I can make a copy of it.
That would
Maybe
be,
helpful.
yeah, that's showing it.
Like, so, yeah, that we broke it down by year, going through the, so how we came to where we are was I met with all the department heads, school, and got their priorities within their department, and broke it down a little bit further into by year, separate out. But, is it okay to see it up here, or do you guys want a paper copy? It looks like he has it somewhat up.
Well,
I can make, I don't mind making
It
paper
is
copies.
by year or by the 1 to 5 year?
So if you, so that was like the main document I worked with the department heads to fill out, and then there was a capital budget recommendations for the next, say, 4 fiscal years roughly.
That would,
How about I think that? Okay.
I do not bring that.
Yes. Excuse me.
So how much of the miscalculation is on the town versus the state?
And then I realized how many copies do I need? Let's see.
Pretty large increases
I'll go
in
with Joe.
tax bill part
5, 6,
two.
do you want one, Amy? 7?
this is fine.
Connor, do you want a copy?
No, thank you. Ask that question again.
So obviously everyone got their supplies. Like what portion of that is like on us, which portion, I guess, like county, we have no control over what they set their rate at, right? DRA does the same thing, state, who's also now in trouble, sets their rate, so.
No. Yeah, so I mean, it's all local stuff, right? So let's look at one of the last questions that I made, right?
I guess where is the disconnect that was a significant increase?
So voters approved an increase of tax effort of about 7% in March, okay? So the average taxpayer should be paying 7% more in taxes. The people who are paying more than 7% in actual taxes, not assessed value, in actual taxes are people whose values increased more than the average.
Right.
So the average increase was about 30%. People who their assessed values increased more than that. And that could have been because of renovations, additions, other property changes, or it could have just been because the market, their property is worth more than 30%, that those people will pay more in taxes than a 7% increase. There are property taxpayers in Barrington. I'm pulling together a list so I can see like what portion of taxpayers' tax bill actually went down. But there's people whose actual taxes, even with a 7% increase, their actual taxes went down because the value of their property on average rose less than the average of 30%, and enough less that they're not paying taxes. Now, the people you won't hear from are the people whose taxes went down, because nobody wants to put their hand up and say, oh, my taxes went down, you're kidding me. But that's happening in 2021. A lot of the lakefront property, people's taxes went down because the waterfront property, so much of that value is already realized compared to the fair market value, that revaluation didn't add a lot of value there.
Right.
Because the values were already, the fair market, the labor market, the real estate market didn't change a lot there. Where we've seen the biggest increases in 2021 and 2023 in the real estate market was in the most accessible housing. So mobile homes, modular homes, especially on their own land, in 2021 and in 2023 saw above average increases in values. And that's what they're selling for. That is the real estate market value of those properties. But those are the categories that are most experiencing higher tax bills, higher than average. So the state doesn't have any part, like if you look at this table, the state doesn't even have to do it. In other states that have property taxes, the towns set their own tax rate. The state is only involved as like a check and balance, I guess. All of these numbers come locally. The school, the town, the county, they send us their number, but that's the delegation. And then they just take that number and divide it out and give it to us. Yeah.
But
interleave.
in my case, nothing happened to my house.
Mhm.
My taxes went up 16.6%.
So the value of your
I didn't
property.
build anything, I didn't
Right.
Same for me.
do anything.
Same for me.
Haven't done anything.
So the
Yeah.
value, the.
So
Couple
what you
things could
said
happen.
about it's people who added on or did something. and
No, I
That's
said that's
not the
part of it.
case.
No, I said that's part of it.
And there's a big difference between 7 and 16.
There is. Yeah, but here's.
Good math.
But here are some things, in the 2021 example of the waterfront property is a good example, because that value was already realized. It could be during the 2021 revaluation, the real estate value of a property that increased 16% this year wasn't realized as much. It didn't catch up as much. It's broad brushstrokes, right? So it could be that it's more of a catch up. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is, could you sell your property for what it's assessed for? If not, file an abatement. And if you could, then that means that you're sharing your appropriate burden of tax responsibility. And if it went up a lot now, maybe that means you were undervalued for a number of years and paid less than you probably should have. And it's, people say, oh, the values of my property went up so much in 6 months. That's not true. The last revaluation was 2 years ago. And that's the metric, but it might not have been perfect then. People don't file abatements when they're under assessed. And so people that end up over assessed file abatements. We process abatements regularly. But people that are under assessed, well, they just ride that out. And then eventually they probably catch up, and maybe that's what it is for individual property taxpayers whose values jumped more. Which was more of a catch up. But it's not intended to be any fuzzy math. It's just assessment is fair market value. Divide that by what voters approve, and that's tax responsibility.
Okay. So as I mentioned before, it's broken out in the next few years. And it includes other things that already may be identified in budgets, such as like the ambulance and that sort of thing. So, I'm not quite sure how you want me to present it, so I don't know if you want to review it, and if you have any questions for me. I don't think that there's any, let's see, for 2024. And you may have already spoken this, so it's like notes are like kind of like not necessarily action items, but what anticipate happening that year. So the first one is to increase the 2024 dam engineering repair replacement capital reserve. Number 2 is present which you may already have identified, the $150,000 warrant article in 2024 for public safety building design engineering impact fee study. Number 3, earmark ARPA funds to replace the gymnasium wall for energy efficiency.
Oh, as we go through this.
Yeah, sure.
The important thing from my perspective is how is each one of these funded? Or is it part of a warrant article? Is it not included in a warrant article now?
Yeah, that's
Is it
what I
covered
said.
by expenses?
Yeah, the 3 weeks ago, when you said you guys wanted to talk about a capital improvement program, I sent you the last draft of the CIP, which is the responsibility of the planning board, and then the select board's funding what they approved as a funding plan. And so that was from their October 2nd meeting, and I just sent you the copy of the town administrator report. I can tell you whatever you want. You have that as a resource to look back on, but which ones you just tell me what you know, want to know the funding plan for.
I'm really, when I look at your major spreadsheet, it's got those things that happen within the next 5 years, not the next 2, which are, and it doesn't tell me specifically which of these projects are going to require a revenue bond or some separate warrant. So
That's why I like the spreadsheet that I sent you that has it by year instead of in the next 6 years. And it's the same numbers, it's all the same data, but that's just spread out 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027. Is that what you were looking for?
that's what I think we need to see.
Yeah, that's in the spreadsheet I sent out though. That was a few weeks ago. I can pull it up on the screen if you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, read it.
So on here though, if it helps, as also as a reference, their capital project ID number 1 through 15 is like a prioritization order, like right here.
Yeah.
So all of these we're taking from here. And we're spread out for the next 10 years. And so when we went back to the planning board, they wanted to see, well, where's the bigger ticket items in the next few years we can accomplish, because every year this is going to be updated for planning. And then so this is up to help for planning purposes too. So we kind of where we stopped, it started going into just basically vehicles, or maybe there wasn't anything that was requested that year that far out.
Well, summarize for me then, for the year 24.
They want all of it.
They want all of this.
Prioritization one.
And is there totally identified funding source for each of these, including warrant?
Yeah, so
Yes.
if you look at the email that I sent, all of the projects, with the exception of some of the recreation projects, are part of an approved funding plan that the select board adopted. And so, am I sharing that? No. So this is that spreadsheet, right? This is the spreadsheet I emailed out to everybody. I'll zoom in because this is the only part that matters, and I'll freeze. Let's see, I'll freeze.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I'll just freeze the top so we can see that. But if we scroll down, so this is what we're looking at, right?
Well, that's what you just copied.
Yeah. So this is 2024.
Right.
So Coffer Dam, that's part of the approved dam repair replacement engineering capital reserve. What the select board said is we want this riprap filter moved to 2025, and we're going to do this project in 2024, this project in 2025. If we add $200,000 to the dam replacement engineering capital reserve in 24 and 25, we'll be able to fund both of those projects. So they agreed to that funding plan. And this is all written, all of this funding plan is written, and it's in that email from the October 2nd select board meeting. It's in the town administrator report, but I sent it to you all in an email. So I don't want you, I mean, I don't want you to feel like you have to take notes on all this, that is all there. But that's the funding plan for this. This hazard mitigation, that's a grant, that funding source is in place. The engineering for the public safety building, as you know, that's a proposed warrant article for 2024 as a separate funding source. The ambulance, that's part of an approved funding plan with the ambulance fee capital, or the ambulance revolving fund. And so that is cash on hand that's available. The select board actually just authorized, it takes 30 months to get an ambulance right now. So that's shown as 2024, but that's when we're going to start. Might see an ambulance in 2027. Okay. The forestry truck, that's part of an approved funding plan in the fire truck capital reserve. Highway department. So this is the one we talked about this at length when the road agent was here. Every one of these highway department pieces of equipment are a part of that approved funding plan for the highway heavy equipment capital reserve. In order to meet the funding thresholds necessary, we need to add $300,000 a year for the next 3 years to that capital reserve, and then drop down to $150,000, maybe forever. And, except costs are probably going to continue increasing. So part of an approved funding plan. Recreation, this is where those aren't, the recreation department plans separately to fund many of these through the revolving fund or grant programs or otherwise. So those aren't necessarily, there aren't necessarily approved funding sources per se for these, but the select board is favorably considering the establishing a TIF district and buying the 12 or 13 acre lot in the town center. And part of that with the TIF district, that would fund some of these items, like the pavilion with the picnic tables, although they're also looking at a grant through the Rotary for that. The energy efficiency wall, we're pursuing the $1 million grant for the 105 Ramsdale Lane. That would cover this part of it. The heating and cooling of the recreation department, that would also cover this part of it. The library, we know that's a separate warrant article. These are budget items. They're in the capital improvement program, but the funding for these is included in the operating budget. This is updating regulations and reviewing the master plan chapter. We've talked extensively about the Richardson Pond Dam, but the current funding plan for that is a cost share between the Conservation Fund and a separate warrant article. Questions about 2024?
I guess I have a general statement. I mean, this binder asked for 775 extra next year in budget increases. What is 6% of the school budget equal?
6%, 27 million.
28 million. So it's a couple more million at least.
No, it would be 27 times 0.06, 1.62 million.
All right, so you're at 3.3 million in a budget increase, right? Overall, I know we're different than the school, but all together, and then I see buying land, putting up a park, putting up a library, repairing a dam that's gonna cost us more down in the middle. I really feel like I'm now living in Durham, where it's like our tax base is growing by residential, which increases taxes with schools, and we're not going the other way. Like buying property in the middle of town should be commercial, not town owned, no revenue producing. And it seems like this is getting out of control. And it's not like, I'm not saying it's anyone's specific fault, but like these wish lists are just growing. And
So I think what you're
going up 16%, which is whatever, families are going up $1,000 a year in property taxes. And, there's 5.1 million in warrant articles on this year between the warrant articles themselves and the library. That's a big pill to swallow. And I think a lot of people aren't happy. I think this wish list is not gonna aid in that situation.
Yeah, so I think your responsibility on the budget committee is to look at this list and say, okay, what are we going to continue doing, right? Because if you're gonna say that we still need to do the repair on the dam, that's $200,000 warrant article. If you say that we need to continue contributing to the fire truck capital reserve so we can meet the plan, that's another $100,000. If you say that we need to continue the highway department equipment replacement schedule, that's $300,000. We're at $500,000 just with those. And I'm not assuming that you say that those are important, but like these, that's a separate warrant article that the budget committee can say, we don't think establishing a TIF district and, building parks and doing that placemaking is important. Perfectly appropriate position, but that isn't even any of the additional warrant articles. The public safety building, it was the budget committee's recommendation to say, do the design, put up the money for the design. And then the library, again, that's a separate warrant article that the budget committee can have a separate perspective on,
I just think it's more reading the room and understanding the temperature of the room and coming up with these things to present them anyway versus how to fund them.
I mean, like you say, some of those things come out of funds that don't affect the property tax rate. So if it's coming out of the recreation
revolving
fund,
Mhm.
that's irregardless. I mean, that's paid for. So that's one that you say, okay, that has no impact on property taxes.
Right.
But is it 100% covered? Is the land separate, like we buy the land, the rec puts the building up? TIF district, the dissenting opinions on that and whether it actually takes away or not takes away from the tax base.
Oh, it definitely takes away from the tax base.
But that's what I'm saying. I think we need, as a town, need to go the other way. And we had this conversation, like we're losing to Lee, we're losing to Epping, we're losing to Rochester.
Mhm.
Ability to put commercial, which actually helps the tax base.
Yeah, so and here's I understand your point about reading the room. The challenge of managing a municipal trajectory is the processes that we rely on are, master planning and visioning and, that input. But we also rely heavily on resident feedback through voting, right? And so, this group has talked before, and Peter made the point very strong 2 meetings ago, that residents approve everything. We present things to them, they approve everything as far as additional appropriations with capital reserve contributions.
Feels good.
So, I mean.
So you get your tax bill.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't feel so good.
So if we it's a responsibility, I feel, for especially the select board, but for the town, to present voters with options that accomplish what they say that they want or need. And that's the beauty of the ballot with separate initiatives. And, the select board talked extensively about bundling things on an individual warrant article, like the public safety building and the library and other things. The general conclusion was that's a bad idea because it eliminates the voter's ability to say, yes, I like this, no, I don't like that. And so the TIF district, I think, is a great example of this. We continue to hear that message consistently. And if the people that are involved say, we want to see something like this, I think we have a responsibility to present a way to accomplish what they want. Now, if when voters go in and pull the curtain closed and they say, no, we don't want that, perfect, that's policy setting, that's direction. As far as the tax base thing, right? So that property, the 13-acre property has been on the market for almost a year, and they've had exactly that much interest. It doesn't have front visibility on Route 9 or 125. And part of the idea of establishing the town center when that zoning district was originally set up was making municipal investment in order to facilitate the type of commercial development, like give businesses an excuse to settle there and bring tax revenue and tax base there. And so, that's the part of the TIF district where the end goal is to have a broader tax base than you did when you started by reinvesting some money early on and ending up with a bigger tax base. Doesn't always work that way, but that's, part of the goal from my perspective.
I guess from my perspective, really, I think we should consider actually having a come to Jesus sort of discussion at the deliberative section. And just really sitting down and saying, your taxes are going up, here's why, here's what your options are. Because even when I look at the costs that we were talking about yesterday for the special fund for the trying to offset future costs of the tipping fee, people are going to see that and it's like, okay, you're just asking me for money. It's something there. The warrant article as it's written never gives you real perspective. If we were to go and say, that's a vehicle, but the question you have is, do you want to pay more today so it sort of reduces the impact over time, or do you just want to wait 2 years and boom, you've got a big increase, right? And so for me, one of the things we could do really that would be helpful to the town is actually to lay this out in some clear way in a very public setting where everybody can listen.
I fully get the savings aspect of it, right? Like, I fully understand, and that's why I fought for the ambulance money to be combined with the fire truck, because it's one or the other, but there's needs and wants. And I think we need to slow on the wants and focus on funding the needs and keeping the tax rate and the expense to the citizens.
But that's their choice, right? I think.
That's why each of these has a separate warrant article, because then the people do say, I want this, I want a big recreation area, and it's worth $100,000 today to do.
But I think it also goes back to what Peter says is voters aren't informed. They don't know what they're voting on. So we're presenting stuff I think in some instances with the expectations that'll just pass because that's what happens to these. I mean, when was the last time the budget was voted down and went back to the default?
It's been a long time for the budget, but initiatives fail, right? Library has consistently failed. The TIF district failed last year. And, I don't think we being the administration of the select board say, oh, we're going to put a warrant article out there because we know it's going to pass, right? I think there was a lot of concern last year, especially presenting all the warrant articles after going years by funding them from fund balance and then putting them on the tax rate. I think there was a tremendous amount of concern that this might throw off our savings plans that we've had established for, a long time. Now, that wasn't the result. And that was part of justification for putting that analysis together, what it looked like.
It's interesting, 40% of the people, we're talking about this, 40% of the people voted no to everything. Right, I presume it's the same, I don't know. But I don't know what their thinking is, and that's why I think it's important for us to have this discussion is, you can just say no, and it's almost like a rant. It doesn't clear anything, because when you look at the ambulance, you're gonna pay for this, right? And the question is, this year it's $100,000, if you say no, next year it's $200,000, next year it's $300,000.
I'm looking at what they got on their list for 2025, and it's 22 million.
That's what?
22 million You know, all those things that are gonna hit in 2025, those have, to, you know, and you look at Swains Lake culverts, that's 6 million. And it's gonna be a warrant article? No way.
It's gonna be.
The population's gonna say, forget it. So what are the options? The option is you have to bond it.
So that's
It's
proposed as a bond.
necessary.
Yeah, that's proposed as a bond.
It's.
Yeah, would you like to go to
Either
2025?
way, we're paying for it.
Yeah.
Let me ask a question on 2024. I thought, and I could be wrong, that the 3.5 million for the library was for the library. And there was talk being bantered about another million to renovate the space for rec.
That's the grant that we're
Separate.
pursuing. Separate.
Okay, but that isn't in the bank, so that's speculation.
Yeah, that speculation wouldn't happen. That's why the proposal would be to include $300,000 in the library warrant article. So if it passed and there wasn't any other funding available, there would at least be money to renovate the library space and make sure it's functional.
So does 3.5 become 3.8?
No,
So 3.5 covers the renovation of the existing library for the rec?
the library leadership is optimistic that their bond request will be close to $3 million. Given the fundraising money that they have and what they,
You mean the library trust?
did I say that?
Trustees out of
I
it.
thought you said rec.
No,
It's
library
library.
trustees. Library trustees. So yeah, that number isn't set in stone yet.
But where does the renovations to up on Ramsdale come from for the rec in the existing library?
The current proposal is to include $300,000 in the bond request of the library warrant article for renovating the space. So all things equal, library passes, everything else fails. There's $300,000 available to make sure that that space isn't just vacated and left useless. The grant proposal would amplify what would be able to be accomplished at 105 Ramsdale Lane. The benefit, one of the items of the grant proposal is if we get the grant and the library fails, we can still make improvements to that building with an addition out the gym wall and add that programming space, at the facility there.
I guess I still struggle with adding 300,000 to the library bond to renovate an existing building. I think that's, hiding money as like.
I look at it as it's almost a package deal, right? You have somebody move out, you have to figure out what to do with what's there.
I mean, I guess it's just the gift that keeps on giving, right? We're gonna buy something, renovate it, then we're gonna add more space, which eventually is gonna increase our costs to maintain additional space. And, there'll be staffing requests and other stuff, like it's gonna compound and expand to be an unreasonable expense every year.
Yeah, but I would say from what I've seen, and I haven't voted for the library yet. I would say what's interesting about it is that it's something that people care about, right? The recreation department is paid for, right? People pay their own money to go there and they're finding value. The library, I mean, how many areas do we have people, raising whatever it is, $300,000-$500,000? People really want this. And so maybe just lumping it together and say, okay, you're getting the library, but this is actually your chance to also increase the ability of doing more with the rec center. So it's almost a package, right? I mean, to me, it's an interesting way of looking at it.
I just think they're two separate projects.
They are.
Like you could leave that building empty or at least a set time. It doesn't have to be right away made functional.
But if people say no to the library, right, we could just say, well, the following year, you do the rec center or something, a small thing. I don't know. There are lots of ways to do it, but I think Lincoln that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know how much utility has to go and be kept on in that empty space there. Is that completely separate as a zone from the rest of the?
I mean, it's not a separate HVAC zone, but it's not separately insulated. It's not isolated in the same way.
They have to have heat in order to.
The mechanical systems are plumbing.
See, I think what's interesting is this is the last real chance, it strikes me, maybe you all think differently, that we'd ever get a new library. Right? We're running out of space, right? Just like the town center. And so you can actually say, well, it's the last time we really have a realistic opportunity getting a library at this cost point, certainly. And it also, it's the last chance that you can do a major renovation to support the rec center. this is a major, to me, step change, and it's something that I think people should recognize that, there's not gonna be other times to do this, right? And it's your choice.
For these discussions, though, shouldn't we look at what the warrant article is? And then weigh in on it with all these
We will do
discussions?
that.
Right,
We will do that.
okay,
That's the next meeting. This one is trying to recognize how to sell. Let's ask another question. For the $3 million bond, what impact will that have on the 2025 tax?
Yeah, so what we're waiting for is for them to know what the bond is, so we can get the specific cut sheet from the bond bank where they estimate what their rate will be and what the repayment schedule will be over 20 years with the tax rate impact.
We can't calculate that here on the back of an envelope, because this is what people are gonna look at. Okay, we're asking for a $3 million bond in 2024. It's gonna affect 25 taxes. And then we're asking for a $10 million bond in 2025. What's that gonna do to taxes in 2026? So that's where people are coming. Oh, my tax rate's already going up. It's a bond. It's still gonna affect my taxes, not that year, but the next year.
I mean, even at, say it's 6% bond rate, right? What does that do?
Over what period of time? We have to communicate, even though we don't have specifics, what the potential impact is gonna be. Give them a range. It's gonna mean,
So I'll show you what the numbers that I got in June, that are likely, not that different. They had a July sale and their rates, I can tell you what their rates were after I get these open. I had them do 10 million, 7 million, and 4 million. So it will be in the neighborhood of, the scale that we're talking about.
Just ask a quick question. Does anybody mind if I put the air on? Are you guys filming stuff?
You can now, it's in the budget.
Open the window then. I'll just open the window.
Yeah.
No, I don't care.
Honestly, if you're looking for some fresh air, opening the window is a better bet because you have to change this one to cool mode and like your thermostat to cool mode in order for it to switch from heating to cooling.
Okay.
Because there's 3 thermostats on the furnace. So. Or just open the door so there's some airflow.
Well,
Just prop the
and
doors
Amy will
open.
freeze.
Amy,
What's
it's always
that?
cold.
I mean, I can.
That Amy?
Yeah.
Yeah, prop the doors
Just gonna
open.
prop the
That will be plenty. Okay, so I'm going to. So they assumed interest cost of 4.25%. And this was in June. That was their
I don't
estimate.
want to freeze him.
Their 20-year, for the July sale, the actual interest rate that they received was 3.65%. And that was July of 2023. People talk about interest rates and how they're going through the roof. For municipal bonds, it's a completely different metric than like the Fed rate or the interest rates or all the rest, because it's that you're selling a different product when you're selling a municipal bond. 3.65% was the interest rate that they got.
Where do you see that? I see 4.25.
It's a separate email.
Okay, sorry.
I'm saying that because this was an anticipated, they always overestimate, right? Our 20-year interest rate, blah, 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 is 3.44%. We use 4.25 to be conservative. Okay, so this is a $4 million bond. So we'll start, so a $4 million bond starting in 2025 with, all things aren't perfectly equal, would add 27 cents to the tax rate. A $20 million bond would add 68 cents to the tax rate.
what's the term, 20 years?
20 years. So I mean, those numbers aren't exact. Like I said, we'll update them with exact numbers, but that's the best information that's available.
That's $300 on an average house before you touch any other line in the budget, before you add factor in the school and the town portion, or any other warrant articles.
So that's what they're gonna see. It's gonna hit. And the question we have to be able to be transparent about is what's gonna hit you Well, based on what you're voting for this year, and then what are you gonna be asked to vote for next year, and then what next year? And it's just gonna, after we just hit them with a huge increase in tax rate.
And I think maybe the question is to ask, what is flexible, right? There are some things where there's just no flexibility and some things where people really have an option. In the bond, you don't have an option, right? We can have, I mean, we have the best schools in the world, but if you can't get them because you can't get over the causeway or whatever, or we have culverts that fill up, you know, it's, you gotta do that to me.
Well, and that's part of the communications that you have to
Exactly.
give them. You're either gonna, you're gonna be hit, so it's a must-have because it's a safety issue. And that starts there. And then from then on down, they say, no, 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 no. So our job is then to try to communicate to them, what are the must-haves?
Mhm.
And what do we have to do without?
Yeah, so I mean, now's the time to start making those decisions, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, but my point is, the reason I wanted to get involved with the CIP is if we looked at 2024 in isolation, doesn't sound too bad. A little bit of bond for the library, okay, I'm for, but we get the library passes, okay, fine. People want that, but do I really have to have it?
But that's why I come to Jesus meeting, the deliberative session to me would be really useful because
It's part of the communication, because that they get hit with that, and then when they get hit with next year with these other ones that are must-haves, where do we go? They turn those down.
I mean, like $10 million for 12 classroom addition at the school, that means 12 more teachers on the school budget.
Yeah.
So
With a
there's-
declining population.
well, I think that
Correct.
there's a whole other discussion. So they were
Yeah.
looking for a data management group, right? So they're looking for 2 FTEs for that this year. And the problem that I have with this is that there's no way for the voters to actually say, is that better than full-time police or anything else that's here, right? And so one of the things I think we should do is reach out to the school board, and I know it's hard, and say, you know, their first goal and their whole plan is that this preserve their funding. Well, that's fine, but this is a zero-sum game, right? And so they need to work with us, we need to work with them, and maybe that's our first entry into trying to really get joint planning, which is ultimately, I think, what we need to do, right?
If you can get Gibson and Garth to save money, more power to you.
Well, I think we have to, right? Because we're all gonna get hit. Voters are gonna say no to everything, right? And I say, maybe, I don't even know if we can do this, maybe we put a warrant article that's, it's not legal, but we just say, look, the town requests that the voters request that the town and school get together and do long-range planning. Can we do that? Why not? Put some pressure on them. I'm happy to go talk to the school board and at least raise it, but, if we go back and say, well, you could do this the right way, or we will just put a warrant article forward. We can go to like New Hampshire Listens, which is, they do this type of mediation, have a neutral party, say, let's figure out what the ground rules are that everyone can live with. Let's figure out what we're actually doing. But I'll go to the school and suggest this. I mean, I think we have to do it. And I'm not sure they understand what's coming down the pike either. And we need to let them know that this is coming so that they can also be mentally prepared as well.
Right.
We're all in this together.
Well, and they've been cognizant of the library issue, so they've tried to schedule things in their improvements to kind of adapt to what's needed for the library.
Well, I saw in the
But the
notes.
library they use our library for their education.
Yeah,
So, I mean, that's a different issue than the stuff with the dam. I don't care about the dam.
right. But they want the rec center too, right? They were talking about.
I think it's a great idea. And not to devalue that idea or not to detract from that idea, but a silver lining, a week and a half ago, I met with the superintendent because I think through Dannon's liaisonship to the school board, he let them know that the select board was interested in then maybe deferring that elementary school addition to 2026 because we had a lot of infrastructure projects that we planned to bring in 2025. And so the superintendent, when we met, they had engaged an architect to evaluate an addition. And the preliminary conclusion was that they didn't need a 10 classroom addition, that they could get by with a much smaller addition to reconfigure some of the space they have now. I'm not going to get this right, but basically there's certain provisions of student service, specialized student service, which require separate rooms. And right now they're tying up kind of like whole classrooms providing those services. If they did an addition where they made smaller instructional specialized service facilities, they could get the whole classrooms back onto the roles for whole classrooms to meet the needs that they have. So one, they're talking about a smaller scale. Two, that would be a smaller cost. Three, even if they started now, they wouldn't be ready for 2025. So they're looking at 2026 anyways. And so, this CIP is done. That will be an update that they present to the CIP for the 2025 to 2035 CIP. But to Scott's point, that could happen in a much more organized way where we're talking about it and we're not crossing any wires on, planning for these things. And we're planning more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. We're planning much farther out, and we revisit those conversations every year.
And the interesting thing is that they are, what I've understood, and maybe I'm wrong, but when we talked about, the fire chief and police, the idea is that the new developments coming in isn't bringing in a lot of younger families, it's older people. And so the needs that you have would be targeted more to older people. The school is actually predicting that there's going to be more people coming at the earliest ages, and I don't know why, but I presume they're looking at all the building. I think we should be going forward with a common set of assumptions, right? And even if we can get there, we can start to get consistent thinking and at least begin. They're going to come kicking and screaming, but at least if we can start that process, I think it's really useful.
We have one pot of money in the town.
Exactly.
And we have two different groups reaching into the pot, and neither one really knows what the other one's doing.
And the voters don't understand the choices that they're making, right? They're funding 2 more positions for their data management. And yet here we are talking about fundamental things that are needed for the town. The voters have to understand that too. And I don't know how else to surface it, but to begin to get us to talk together.
Okay. Do you want me to go through 2025, or we've talked about enough of it?
I don't think we have to talk. I mean, I don't know how much more we can say. It's just a lot of big numbers on there that.
So there is hope.
Scary.
There is hope, because let's continue. And I mean that. This is a big bite at the apple, right? And it's, I would argue it's essential. Because without our infrastructure, what are we really providing for services for the town? And there's been a lot of deferred maintenance on road infrastructure, and that's unfortunate, and that's catching up to us. We need to address them. What the select board conceptually approved was the idea of a $10 million infrastructure bond in 2025 that says we're doing all of this. That's the public safety building. That's
Causeways.
That's just a spirit. The causeways, Malago, Toll End Road, and Deer Ridge.
What if we were to get rid of the culverts and just put that in there too? Then that reduces tax this year.
Say that again?
Because we have a culvert fund, right?
Yeah, so we're using that for the engineering, so we can make these shovel ready and hopefully get some other money. So maybe the bond isn't 10 million, maybe the bond's 8 million. So we're using that as cash on hand to do the preliminary design and engineering of these projects, so we can get them shovel ready, because that's the best way to get it.
But we need money put into that warrant article this year.
Mhm.
Because if we could just wrap it all into the bond, that would be better to me.
I won't say confidently. Let me take another look at the balance. Somebody could probably flip to the page in capital reserve. Capital reserve balance is probably chapter like 6 or 7 or something. Of the.
What's that?
He's looking for the capital reserve.
If we had enough cash on hand to keep engineering going on those and make sure that the true capital costs of like the construction project are just rolled into the bond, that would reduce the appropriation this year. It's not a terrible idea if we're having to parse out. Okay. Virgin Cobra. Yeah, so the balance available in that is 682. I'd have to ask Amy what is encumbered already with existing projects.
But maybe we just say to the voters, that's what we're thinking.
You're right.
And maybe that's just a way that we're reducing, trying to minimize tax increases this year.
But anyways, I wanted to show, this is still live. Okay, I wanted to show John the hope. So 2025, 2026. Remember, the select board recommendation was to move these to 2025 and do that as that infrastructure. But we're moving the elementary school over here. So 2026 is still gonna be a tough year. Toll End Road, this 1.5 million was moved. So now we're just talking less than $1 million. Here, the middle school, I don't know about that 1.5 million. So the school has $2 million of infrastructure here. I'm sure that's needed. Maybe that's appropriately, but that's small. Now we're 2029, 170, 2030, 2020, 2031. Look at that, John.
Nobody wants anything in there.
Look at that.
Yeah, but I'm still paying for the wish,
215.
the
Yeah.
Christmas wish
But that's
list.
good.
Right, no one's not.
Well, that's good that we're not compounding it. I mean, I think the concern is that we're building on this.
But there's still stuff will come up. That's what I'm saying is I'm not blind to the fact that this is where it stands now, that there's not something else going to appear.
Yeah.
In 8 years from now, there's gonna be, someone's gonna want whatever for something.
But the hand we were dealt specific to the infrastructure projects is Mark said it perfect. The old approach was how many roads can we make black? Not how many roads can we fix? And we have been fixing roads through the paving process slowly. What we have not adequately addressed yet is fixing the big problems. Causeway culverts, Toll End Road, Deer Ridge, Malago, these big millions of dollar projects. We can't continue to defer them.
And I'm not fighting the deferment of those type of things. Culverts have to be fixed.
Yeah.
Dams have to be fixed. It's the fringe where it's a need versus a want that I struggle to move forward with because you have so much other stuff you're paying for.
And I respect that opinion tremendously. Let me ask you this, John Morris, king for a day. Would you articulate that that residents shouldn't even be asked for those want levels, which a certain number of residents want and want to be presented with the option? Or John Morris, king for a day, is just simply the position that the budget committee can take those wants and not recommend them because they're wants and not needs?
I mean, I wouldn't propose some of these wish list items. Obviously, anybody can propose whatever they want.
Right.
Obviously, I'm gonna not recommend the ones I don't believe in.
Right.
So somewhere in the middle of your.
Yeah, no, I mean, I
So
guess
you're-
that makes sense. So you're
Queen for the day instead of
recognizing
king.
that there are going to be warrant articles that you don't individually support and you might not propose.
Correct.
But I think the value of the budget committee, and somebody said that the budget committee recommendations don't matter. I think they really do. I think voters really pay attention to the select board and budget committee recommendations. And the data supports that too. Actually, part of the analysis that you made, you said that they didn't really move the needle.
Well, we said no to a bunch of things last year. I don't know that people really listen to us as much. It's not that we don't make an impact, but I think we're presenting false choices, right? We're saying you can say no to all these warrant articles, but you can't really. And what I would like to do is put that context to everybody so that they understand, not just there's this dollar thing last year. It made no sense to me. There are so many things. I would like them to really understand the broader picture that the town is facing. And to me, that's what's more important than our vote.
Yeah.
What I'm looking at here is these are the total costs that we're estimating for each of these particular projects.
Right.
What I don't know is which ones have a warrant article attached to them, so each one of these do, and what the current fund balance is for these. So what are we going to need to go and look for asks year to year to year for continuing to go and build these funds up in order to go and meet those targets?
Yeah, that's a great point. So that's what I did going through 2024, explaining that, hey, these are the ones. So as far as the what's available in fund balance, that chapter 9, it actually, or 8, it actually is, that shows all the capital reserves and trust funds and the balances that are available. The part that is separate from that is the funding plan. That's where I was talking about, like highway department, the 3 years at 300,000, then down to 150,000. And so that's where those parts of the capital improvement program that are funded through that save ahead model are. But some of these, like these pink ones, are, anticipated bonds to fund all or a portion of them, which would be separate warrant articles, or combined, which would be part of the proposal.
What
Yeah,
would be,
but
if you
that
took,
still goes and adds to the cost for each,
No question.
So how hard would it be to come up with a funding model based upon this improvement plan, what the tax rate might be?
Oh, yeah, that would be, yeah, I can do that.
Because I think that would be sort of what we would want to have. right?
Rip the
We can really
Band-Aid
see-
Well,
Residents of the town of Barrington, this is our CIP.
Exactly.
To implement it, your tax rate would go up this much this year, this much that year, this much that
Exactly,
year.
and these are your choices,
right.
right? Black and white.
And then for each one of them, when they come up, the warrant article proposals that we have are not the text. We need to see more on what does it really mean, and is it deferrable? Upgrade the old Settlers Road vault. What happens if you don't?
It's red listed bridge. Deficient by the state of New Hampshire,
That's what, those are.
but
the kinds-
80% funded by the state of New Hampshire.
Well, those are the kinds of things that we need to see in order to really weigh in on.
Steve, would you agree that we should do something at the deliberative session that really lays this all out?
Well, we have, that's one of the options for communicating, and I think that's a good option to communicate. But a lot of people, it has pretty good attendance usually. So,
If you say your taxes are going up, this is why, I bet you. I mean, we had 600 people go into the master plan, provide input. When was the last time we had 600 people provide input into anything? I think if we could make the deliberative session sexy and get people there, it would be wild, I think.
well, the only issue is at the deliberative session, when you have people that are on the ballot for positions, that consumes a lot of.
I guess I'd say
What?
what's more important.
We don't, no, we don't do any candidacy stuff, other than naming who's gonna be on the ballot.
Well, there's the deliberative session, but then why don't we have something similar to what they did for the candidates? A communication vehicle for
Well, you
one,
wanna have a separate public information meeting.
maybe,
Maybe multiple.
rather than wait until the deliberative session.
But again, the turnout is such a thing is so minor compared to the voting population.
Right.
I'm not sure you're really going to generate much impact.
I reflect on this stuff constantly, and I'm always asking for input. And so I'll never say that something's a bad idea until we try it and it doesn't have a huge impact. What it seems like helps move the needle is investing in creating materials that can be distributed and provided and linked online and steered back to, and et cetera. Peter's point about you're only going to capture an audience. What I like to hope, and it's hard to measure this, is that, you might only have 100 people in a room for something like that, but those 100 people
Exactly.
each know 5 people. And if you give them talking points on purpose or an accident, then they can go talk to their, the people in their circles. Mike House was talking 2 meetings ago that he's got his circle, I think you said, of like a dozen people that you're like regularly talking town stuff with. And I imagine that stuff that comes up at this meeting and the select board meetings that you tune into, you're going back and saying, there's this piece of information, or maybe you want to go read more about this, or did you know that you can go look at that here? Maybe you're trying to sway their opinion about this too. But I think that's where the value, I think it grows organically if we can communicate, rip the Band-Aid off as directly as possible in terms that people understand and in ways that would not easier said than done. But I'm willing to try a public information session, spending more time at deliberative session. All of the above.
I have a question on the document that Vanessa gave us. And maybe Connor explained it, but I missed it, I'm sorry. In 25, it's talking about the $10.5 million bond for Young Road, Cullen Road, Deer Ridge, and Malibu.
Right.
And then on 26, it looks to me like they're repeated.
So what the select board did is made a recommendation, which I don't know if Vanessa printed the final version, but the select board made a recommendation to move those to 2025 with the bond. The
But
fund
they're
them
on,
with the
they're on
bond.
26 as well.
Yes, that's just a mistake.
Okay,
Yeah.
and total spelled wrong, just for the record.
Only going to happen once. Part of the idea too, Peter, is it could be that we don't want to accomplish the infrastructure of all three of those causeways, Toll End Road, Deer Ridge, at the same time in the same year. But we can approve the funding for them at the same time. So we might approve the funding in 2025, which would be why it would be moved to a 2025 project, but we might spend those dollars in 2026 repairing Toll End Road. The balance that we want to obviously make is you don't want to borrow money and then not use it for 3 years, because then you're just accumulating interest unnecessarily.
What Mark did trying to patch was already gone.
I know.
One of the
That
culverts-
poor little dip, I can just picture the paver falling off the side.
So you're getting a new road for your 16%.
You got a new road. He's
I
not getting a
did
new
not,
road.
I got 2 portions of a road.
It's gonna be overlaid next year, so.
I got,
It's
John,
recyclables.
I got patches and a 4-inch drop to get into my driveway.
That's worth 5 cents in Maine. You're welcome.
Would you be able to provide us for our next meeting, sort of what that high level?
I will do you one better. You are all some of the brightest people that pay the closest attention to dollars and cents in this community. I'm gonna provide you all a tool to take any figure, any cost, and calculate the tax rate impact yourself. I will provide the list for the capital improvements program, but, you're welcome. Teach me how to fish. Teach me how to fish.
In some communities, residents are notified as to what their change assessment's gonna be,
Yes,
and we are unable to do that. Is that true?
no, able to do that, able to do that. We notify residents in the tax bill of the updated assessed values.
Well, yeah, I mean, by then it's too late.
You have to.
By then it's too late.
But it's too
There
late.
you go.
It's why we need the new ambulance because.
Too late for what? though?
How many ambulances do we need now?
In other properties I own, I get a written notice as to what the change in assessment is, and at least speculation on what the tax rate's gonna be.
Mhm.
So I can then compute where I think I am tax-wise.
Right. But
And
what does that change practically?
whether I'm gonna get rid of the damn thing or not. That's what I have to think about here, is whether I can afford to stay here.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that it would be beneficial, I feel like it would be more beneficial to have that information in time when you're making decisions on how much to approve, like at voting. You know, you've said it often, and I agree that the system's broken. It would be great if, as soon as you left voting, you got a bill for all the things you just approved, right? Like, that would be history Mary. We approve things in March and find out how much it's gonna actually cost us in November, October.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, yes, some communities take the effort and send separate letters to every taxpayer on, this is, the revaluation isn't finalized, and this is how much values are anticipated to increase. And even maybe some proposed tax rate at that point, even though it's not set yet, and it depends on values. And so the decision-making in Barrington, it's never been done in Barrington, as far as I know. As far back as Corcoran's been here, which has been about 13 years. But in talking to other communities, it doesn't practically change anything. If the assessor is assigning a good fair market value and justification, the basis of justification for the changing values, then there aren't going to be sweeping changes. Like in Barrington, over the summer, once they had calculated all of the sales that were the basis of the evaluation, that entire spreadsheet is on the town's website. All 200 property sales in the catchment period that were the basis for the adjustments in values are online. So you can go look up and say, this house right next to me sold for this much money, and that's part of the reason that my values increased. Anyways, point being, it's an added cost, it's an added administrative burden, and it doesn't change the course of history. The recourse that people have is to file an abatement. And that's the same recourse whether you give them advance, extra notice or not.
Yeah, okay.
But if you want to make a stronger case, the next time the select board does, the next time the town does a revaluation, advocate to the select board that they should send out notices ahead of time. The assessor doesn't advise it because it's an added cost and intangible added benefit.
Throw it in there.
The cost,
Stamps.
I know. I mean, yeah. Where do we go from
When
here?
do they, like, this year we got our bill in July. When do the new assessment values get completed? Or we got our bill in June?
State deadline, yeah, so I'll talk to you about that in a second, but the state deadline for values is October 1st. Generally, when communities do revaluation, they usually ask for an extension, usually maybe like October 15th.
So you couldn't put it in with the July bill, what's not ready for the July bill?
No, nope. But so the July bill, and this is interesting. I mentioned before, Dan had mentioned about the new value. There's $30 million of additional value, new construction value that was added between 2022 and 2023 tax years. So that's like the 40 units across the street from the middle school. That's like the new building on the previously town-owned lot on Redemption. To your point about, we need commercial tax base, that's a good example of that. But when the first half tax bills go out, you look at the updated values, assessed value as of April 1st, because again, that's the snapshot in time for assessment. And any new value from the prior October 1st to that April 1st, that's new value between April 1st and April 1st, really. And that new value, you take your old rate, your old tax rate, divide it by 2, multiply it by the values, or adjust it for the changes of values, and multiply that rate by the current assessed value of the property.
What's the new value? Is that improvements to the home or something?
The new value would be the new total assessed
No,
value.
but you mentioned. What's that piece? Is there additional value or something that somebody's looking at if somebody makes an improvement to their home between?
That's captured. So that's captured annually throughout the year,
Okay,
but it only is taken into account the next April 1st.
right.
So if April 2nd is the best time to start a construction project, because you don't pay taxes on anything you do until starting the next April 1st. So the assessors will collect that data through the whole year, and that will be effective the next April 1st. That's what we capture.
Does
like,
that new value include market?
The new value for the first half bill does not include any changes for revaluation. That's just new dollar for dollar value. So the new value that was added as of April 1st of 2023 was $30 million. The new value, once you factor in the revaluation, was probably $39 million, right? If you figure the average of 30%. So it is impacted the same way.
That's 32 kids in a school district that if they were to come in, wipe out every dollar you gain, 100%.
Oh, no question.
So, yeah, it's,
And what that tax base is matters, right? The numbers for school age population from the units like are across the street from the middle school are a fraction of what they are for single family home housing units. And so that tax base, I think there's an argument to be made that the tax base from that is actually a net positive. Obviously, commercial, like the new Redemption Road building, the TurboCam's building, that's a net positive. You can't argue different.
correct.
The town sold them that lot at a slight discount, but collects full taxes. And has always collected full taxes from TurboCam. There's this perspective, and I don't know where this rumor started, that TurboCam gets this sweet deal and doesn't pay taxes or gets a tax break. No, they paid full taxes since day one. The only thing through a development agreement that TurboCam got was a discount on purchasing property. Because the town recognizes that purchase price is insignificant when you're looking at they're paying more than double that in taxes every single year.
Yeah, I want $30 million up and down 9 and 125,
Yep.
not in the woods somewhere on some other beaten road.
See, that's an interesting point though, because I would say off Route 9 that touches a state road, that's a perfect spot for that type of development because there's limited impact on commercial or on municipal services. And it's a tremendous tax base.
What is?
TurboCam.
No, I'm not saying anything turbo. I want strip malls and whatever up and down 9 and 125.
Yeah, you got this one right next door. 8 commercial units. He's proposing 2 more of these same buildings on the 2 lots next door. 8 commercial units on the first floor, residential above.
Yeah, it's still residential though.
But the thing is, you wouldn't get a developer to build commercial units like that without residential.
But what I guess I'm skeptical of what commercial is gonna go into there.
Well, you say you want strip malls. I don't necessarily think strip malls is the right motif for Barrington, but that's a strip mall. Strip mall is commercial units in a parking lot with commercial,
Yeah, that's fine, man, bro.
Yeah.
I don't, the 9/125 intersection to me doesn't need to look pretty, it needs to look commercial.
Yeah. And that's how zoning's established, right? Zoning's established that way. Zoning says we have 50 square miles. Let's consolidate our commercial development on the state throughways and leave the rest rural character.
Do we still own the lot, before your time, Avery Goodstein Ed down on the Lee line?
Yes. Yep.
Something's going on up there.
That's beyond where the town owns. That's a commercial approved.
Oh, they got all kinds of equipment up on the hill.
Yeah,
That's what the
well,
town owns.
no, they're
Is it
doing
trucks
work
and
on,
equipment?
no, that, they're doing work on the, right of way. All that equipment is right of way work. Before that, there's a
For
development,
the town's benefit?
no, the power line right of way, the power line distribution right of way.
Oh, okay.
Just before that, not land owned by the town, there's an approved commercial project. Forget what they're doing there. The one that kind of goes up the hill. He was
Yeah,
gonna
it's
do
called rock
two-phase
iron.
rock iron repair.
It's like a welding.
That's before the one that kind of goes up the hill. There's a wetland in the front, just before the cell tower.
Between the cell tower and the entrance to the Tamposi.
Exactly, precisely.
This is a school projection of number of kids, and it's going down like it is everywhere, right? There are fewer kids, so they're expecting, there's 455 kids in high school, 23, 24, 25, gonna go down to 414. So that's a lot of money that we're gonna save that goes to all the other school districts.
Not by their budget, we won't.
Not with their budget, I agree.
And not with $10 million for 12 extra classrooms for less kids.
Why? do
Well,
we-
that's why we need to have this discussion with them, because there are.
I asked the superintendent about that when I met with him a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
And she admitted candidly that they don't know where those kids went.
Well, they said that they had 10 kids.
What'd you do with those kids?
We're not getting sued
weren't even in
for
the
missing
district.
kids.
Right. So, in respectfully to the school, they paid, the town split a cost for a demographic study with the school. And the result of that demographic study didn't say that our school age population was declining, but instead said that it was staying constant, even with the increased housing units. They didn't factor in all of the increased housing units, only those that were actually under construction, not conditionally approved. They gave the school formulas for housing types and how to calculate projected enrollment. The school is of the opinion that that demographic study didn't accurately reflect what we're experiencing and anticipates growth in school age population beyond what the demographic study says. I have concerns with that because you pay smart people to tell you what your demographics are and where they're going and rely on that data.
Why bother if you're not going to accept what they tell you?
Right. Now, the caveat is, okay, it didn't factor in projects that were in the approval pipeline, and there's a lot of units. There's hundreds of housing units that weren't factored into that. But they gave them a formula to say how to calculate that. But then, if you factor that in with where they're seeing a decline, then how much does that actually increase us? Now, the enrollment conversation as it relates to elementary school, the elementary school is currently beyond capacity because of the special services and the breakout rooms and things like that. So even if enrollment doesn't increase in elementary school, they have articulated a point that they need space to meet the current demand. And so that's not necessarily the basis for, meeting an addition, but.
Is the ECLC completely at capacity, or there must be space?
The
there?
most
It used to
capacity-
be our middle school.
The most capacity they have is at the middle school. The middle school has maybe a full grade's worth, as it was explained to me, a full grade's worth of capacity. They used some of that space when they added foreign language 2 years ago. And so it's, maybe it's a little bit less, and the space is being used, but could be trimmed back. And so I know that one of the things that they talked about was, well, could we move a grade from the elementary school to the middle school? One of the problems is for education reasons, having fourth graders and eighth graders in the same building isn't really productive. That isn't a best practice. And so the most capacity school has in their facilities is at the middle school.
I'm gonna ask what's happening with the ECLC because I can't believe all those rooms are being occupied by,
For kindergarten.
Well, it's kindergarten and preschool.
it used to be our middle school. There's a whole hallway of classrooms.
I don't think they have any spare rooms because we remember we used to meet there before we had this building. And they kicked us out of the meeting room because they needed it to turn into another preschool classroom. I think the problem with the ECLC, the problem like conceptually about size and size of building is the size of classes, the classroom size for preschool is a lot smaller, and even kindergarten, I think, is smaller than the other grades. So there's a higher ratio of student to teacher. So more space for the same number of kids than if they were older grades.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess in reality, was the libraries attached to that too? The existing library, it's not, all right, say that could become classroom space instead of rec space.
I feel like we're gonna make a ton of progress at our next meeting, as far as like concrete recommendation. I'm most concerned about the budget, right? Because I heard from a couple of people that, hey, we can't afford to do all these things in the budget. Well, we gotta start making some changes, like next week.
Yeah, it's called the default. It's called the default budget.
Yeah,
But if you have this other information for us, we should.
for the CIP.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna help a lot. Good description of what the true need is versus want. That's where
True
we're gonna
description. I
have to
didn't-
make
I
our
didn't
distinction.
Pick up on that homework assignment for me. What do you need for a true need versus want? I mean, I feel like that's a subjective thing that you all have to
That's
decide.
our decision,
Right.
isn't it?
Well, it's also things like the culverts. That's a safety issue, it's a need, and it can't be deferred.
What do you need from me to advise that?
Just, I guess as you did before that, I think, Steve, you mentioned a culvert, and you said that's red listed, has to be done. That's, I think, what we need to know,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Was that you mentioned?
Vanessa, where are the project sheets for the CIP? Do you have them electronically? So
Half
that
of
all
them, yes,
exists.
half of them, no, because some people prefer to write it out versus using
Well,
electronic.
we can scan it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So each one of the projects on the CIP has a project sheet, organized, same fit and finish with varying levels of details. But that's where that information would be. I mean, if you need to see that level of information, it's available.
Well, that's in making the category for that warrant article in terms of what its need is versus what a want is. I mean, I look at some of the things that we have, that if I were, some of the people that I know who vote, okay, it says rec department, fix the wall. Yeah, forget it, don't need it. But that's because they don't have that information. So when I see what's there, we can say, how can we distill that down for the voting population to say, help, if they have that information, it would help them go ahead and approve.
But I guess for me, 25 versus 24 versus 25, if you move 6 from next year to 25, it's really not a huge difference. It really is, what do we have to do? What, like the roads that are failing, the culverts that are failing, we have to do those. Richardson Dam, we have to do something with it. We have our opinions on what we should do with it and who should pay for it. But it has to be done because the state says you're gonna be in trouble if not. Like, that's what I want to see. If it's 10 and 10, and we take 20 million out in 2024, it's really not really that much different. You're still paying for it either way. It's just 1 year earlier, but you get done 1 year earlier. But what is a need? What is an absolute? What is a wish?
Yeah, do you have to take the whole bond out at once? Can you do consecutive bonds? It's like the causeways, you're not gonna do them all in 1 year, right? Or even
Correct.
3 years.
Yep, and that's like what I was saying earlier. So the two options that you basically have are what voters are authorizing is the authority to issue that amount of bonds or notes. Doesn't have to be one bond or note, it can be multiple bonds or notes, but it's just that authorization, and that doesn't lapse. And so you can get an authorization for 10, draw 6 in the first year, 2 in the next year, 2 in the next year, or draw it all and spend it down. And I was saying earlier about you don't want to get gonna balance it on the interest costs. So,
Right.
but the authorization doesn't lapse. to
We
borrow.
would take that into account in long-range planning, right?
In the numbers, when I'm giving you tax rate impact of implementing the CIP, yes.
Yes.
Can you vote to undo that, like the next year? Like if we said yes this year for 20 million and the next year we said we don't like the direction and you undo a bond vote?
That's a
I don't
good question.
think so.
I suspect if you could, that's what we would have done with the bond that was authorized for the Conservation Commission. So Conservation Commission was authorized like $180,000 bond or something silly 6 or 7 years ago.
Oh, more than that, I think.
Oh, okay, it was more, but they didn't spend all of it, and they had like $150,000 of bonding authorization left. And so they borrowed the money. They borrowed the money. I don't know what they did with it. I forget. I wasn't here, but they borrowed the money. So I suspect if you could have removed it, somebody would have said.
Some of that went to, Check's place down there.
Oh, okay. That was part of the bonding authorization?
And I thought the whole deal was like 800 something thousand.
So maybe.
And Veronica
Another-
Gee, they could fix the Richardson Pond Dam with that one.
Well, they had 500,000 cash on hand.
A great, little piece of conservation down there where people can't go on it.
The board of Chuck. Okay,
Well worth the money.
624?
Anything else you think we need for next week? Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
John, you kids.